interests in transport, in the rail system and in the road system, and to allow a certain private interest as well. So I'd like to introduce our two speakers. First of all, Liz Hunter, who is Head of Transport Policy for the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. She worked previously in the Civil Service in the Treasury. Her current role involves shaping transport policy for the region and partaking in decisions about things like HS2 and upgrades of the Transpennine railway system. Now, Kim Groves is the local councillor for Middleton, I think, and is also chair of the West Yorkshire Common Authority Transport Committee since 2018. So I think, Liz, she's your political boss, so to speak. Is that right? Yes. Councillor Groves has been very interested in green issues. She supported the authority's cycling and walking programme, which apparently cost £60 million. Seems an awful lot, but anyway, there we are. And the rollout of electric vehicle charging throughout the region. So we're very pleased to welcome them both. I'll just briefly say how we're going to organise the evening. As we've always organised it before, the speakers will speak for 40 to 50 minutes, and then we'll have a break, 5 to 10 minutes. And after that, we'll have questions. And perhaps during the talk, if you think of a question you want to ask, you could possibly type it in on the chat thing at the bottom of the screen, if everybody can see that. That you can do that during the talk, and then after the interval, I'll try and get them to some sort of order. But if people don't feel happy writing things, there may be an opportunity to ask a question directly. I shall ask Janie if she can sort of see people doing that. But anyway, we'll start now by, I'd like to welcome Liz Hunter and Councillor Groves. Okay.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting us this evening to speak. We're delighted to join you, and I think I do recognise one person. Steve Ross, did I used to work with you? So I wasn't Steve's political boss. Steve was an officer for Leeds City Council when I became a new member, and gave me lots of great advice and helped me on my pathway to being a good councillor and delivering real community values. So lovely to see you. And I don't feel that I'm Liz's political boss either. I just feel that I'm part of the team at WICA and overseeing all the strategic leadership. So I've been chair of the Transport Committee, as Priscilla says, since 2018. And as in politics, you move from portfolio to portfolio, and had not worked on transport before. And that's how it works in politics. As I was joining, you will remember that the chaos of the railway, the timetables, were just absolutely going into meltdown, the biggest change of timetables in history. So quite a lot to get to grips with in my first year. But during this time, I've seen the development of many transport schemes and funding bids. Two projects which I've been heavily involved in. One has been for the Combined Authority has been transforming cities, and we've managed to secure 370 million, which was the biggest funding grant in the country. So that work has already started, and you will see that delivered. It has to be delivered within 2 years. So a lot of exciting schemes coming for West Yorkshire. Well, it's a challenging time with COVID. It's also an exciting time for the transport in West Yorkshire. Liz is going to take us through a presentation with the key priorities around our bus, strategic rail, mass transit, cycling and walking, which is part of the active travel, what we call active travel now. And we will be launching a connectivity strategy for West Yorkshire around December or January time. And it's going to be a significant launch. It really does put public transport at the heart of the strategy, and we are urging people to leave their cars and make that modal shift, which is so crucial for this country. We've got a zero carbon challenge that we have to meet. And even though Leeds has now been declared a clean air zone, we must really keep the focus on the zero carbon challenge. And that modal shift, you will see when the connectivity strategy is launched, that everything that we have done around the remodelling of the bus network, the West Yorkshire Rail Vision, has been developed from grassroots up. So really putting people at the heart of the transport system. I'm happy to discuss this later in detail, as I found since I became Transport Chair, you can talk about transport for hours and hours and hours. And I think it's fair to say when I arrived at Wyker that I wasn't educated in transport. I think when I leave Wyker to my next political position, I will be still so involved in transport, and I will definitely be working with the people of West Yorkshire to make sure that we do get the transport system we deserve. So I'm just going to hand over to Liz, who's going to take us through the slides and the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Groves, and good evening, everybody. So nice to see so many faces on Zoom. I don't think I do know any of you, but do shout up later if you have if you know, we have met previously. So it's really great to be with you tonight. I should say, I think one of you, I think it was Roger, who was saying earlier, has been a lecturer. I'm not a lecturer. My day job is policy development. So hopefully I can talk you through some of the things we're doing today, but apologies if I'm not up to the scratch of your usual speakers. It's definitely not my day job. But really glad to be here and to share some of the work that we're doing at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. And as I already said, I've now lived in Yorkshire for about 4 or 5 years, I think, having spent quite a lot of time in London previously. And before that, I should declare that I'm actually from Lancashire, so it's my home county, but pleased now to have made my home in Yorkshire. And I think, having worked in London as well, I've seen the real benefits of what a transport system can do for a city. And then coming back north and working in Leeds, it really demonstrates the difference actually between what we have here and what I was definitely used to in London. So really pleased that I can try to bring some of that ambition that I think we in the north need for what we want from our transport networks, and make the case to other people to invest. And a lot of my time, a lot of my team's time is spent on trying to make that case to others for investments. And I'll come on to that in as I go through my slides. So I do have some slides, so I'm hoping, Malcolm, whether we can, if I can share my screen, I can talk you through. So bear with me one moment.
No.
So I can't really see now what you can see, so I'm hoping somebody might shout. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Good. And I now can't see you, I'm afraid. So if colleagues, if any, or if you can shout up if you've got questions as we go through. Otherwise, I'll run through the slides and we'll take questions at the end. And if you see people starting to doze off, again, can somebody shout up, and we'll pause and we'll take questions. I'm not sure we'll quite talk for 50 minutes because it'd be great to take some questions and to have a bit of discussion. So just to start really on West Yorkshire, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the area. In terms of our geography, we cover Leeds, Wakefield, Kirklees, Calderdale and Bradford. And as the combined authority, we look after transport and economic policy for the region. So we combined officer group, we support both the local enterprise partnership, which is chaired by Roger Marsh, and we also have the combined authority, which is currently chaired by Councillor Hinchcliffe, who's also the leader of Bradford. So we serve both the kind of business, like I say, the business community through the LEP and our politicians through the combined authority. We are a sizable area with a large workforce, number of businesses, universities, and I think we try and demonstrate, therefore, why it's really important, given this geography and given our economic potential, that we can really make the case for why investment is needed here. So that's just a bit of a flavour of our area. And then in terms of our vision for that combined authority area, it's very much about having a strong and successful economy, and transport plays a real role in that. And as you can see in terms of the priorities at the bottom of this slide, we are really focused on boosting productivity, inclusive growth, the climate emergency that Councillor Groves has already mentioned. Obviously, as I say, 21st transport is one of those priorities because we think that's an enabler of those three other priorities. And I'll come back to some of that as we go through the presentation, because transport can really help make those better connections for people, for businesses, enable people to be in the right jobs with the right skill sets if they can access employment in an easy way. And as I'll come back to, transport is a real key element in terms of our climate emergency work. Also on this slide, as you'll see, one of the things that we also are involved in is securing money and powers for the region. And we do spend a lot of time, like I say, making the case, so writing business cases to government for money. We are also in the process of completing our devolution deal. So you may have read in the press that back in March, we agreed with government that we would have a mayor and a set of powers to go alongside. And we are currently going through the process at the moment of we've consulted with the public around it, and we're working now with government to enable the powers to be in place. And I think there's further parts of that process to happen with our constituent authorities over the kind of coming months. So we're really hoping that that all goes smoothly for the next couple of months for an election in May next year for a mayor. And that happened basically, I think, around the time of the budget, and 3 days later we went into lockdown. So the world has certainly changed in terms of everything really, but I'll come on to in a moment what that currently means for transport. But we're still hoping to progress, like I say, with the mayoral approach. So this evening, what I thought I would cover, there's quite a lot, as Councillor Grove says, that we could get into. So I'll try and give you a picture of a number of different things that we're working on, and then we can come back in more detail in the questions if there's something particularly that you'd like us to talk about a little bit more. So I thought we'd start off with our strategy, a little bit about what we're doing because of COVID, some of our current priorities and investment programmes, and then thinking forward, and Councillor Groves has already mentioned around our future connectivity strategy and what we are doing to have a pipeline of interventions for the future. So this is our transport strategy. So we published a couple of years ago the approach that we want to take across all of our policies. And as you can see from this slide, we had a number of kind of themes around the economy, environment, and very much place and people at the heart of it. And as you can see from the right-hand side here, we did at that point set a number of targets for how we wanted to see modal shift happen across the region. And at that time, like I say, it was a couple of years ago, it was felt even then that some of these were quite ambitious. And again, we'll probably touch a little bit when we come back to kind of COVID and the impact that's had on patronage at the moment. But certainly the shift towards public transport was seen as something that we were really keen on achieving. So that set out our kind of overall approach across a number of different themes, which I'll touch upon as we go through. But what's interesting, as I say, is that those targets for what we wanted to see in modal shift were developed a couple of years ago, and since then our councils and the combined authority has declared the climate emergency and has created a new net to zero carbon target by 2038 with significant progress earlier. And so we are currently looking at the moment at what we're calling carbon pathway work. So how we can achieve that target, and given that transport is the in the region the biggest emitter of carbon, what we can try and do to help meet that target from a transport perspective. So we've been, like I say, we've been doing some work to look at what the kind of modal shift is that we think we're going to have to make, because whilst we hope that technology will help, so the move towards greener vehicles, it won't achieve everything by the target that we have set. So we do think, and the modelling is suggesting that modal shift is needed. So we may need to kind of come back to some of our targets, and that's something we're thinking about. But the carbon pathway work is helping really kind of focus on the types of interventions, the types of things we're going to have to do if we're going to meet that carbon target. So just to kind of think about the kind of public input, and this is thinking kind of through the lens of COVID at the moment. But one of the things that we have been wanting to try and do is, through the work that we have, is how we can maintain the kind of public engagement in everything we're doing at the moment. So I just thought I would highlight a couple of things that we have and that we're doing. And one of those, and hopefully, I don't know if you've seen this, if you're logged on or have an account with Your Voice, which is our consultation platform. So through this, we and our district partners are consulting on a range of schemes. That's the mechanism through which people can provide their comments. And one of the things that we launched over the summer was a interactive map around walking and cycling, because very much through the kind of COVID through lockdown, and I'll come on to this in a moment, we did see more people walking and cycling, and we have been bidding for money from government to invest in our active travel through something called emergency active travel funding. And so we wanted to quite quickly gauge from members of the public where some of the problems are on our networks, and we know there are many. So we have an interactive map where people can raise issues around accessibility, new crossings, cycling and walking issues. So we have moved quite a lot of the things that we are doing online, and I think as we set out, a few of us who were early on to the Zoom call saying actually that a lot of it has moved online, and we are really keen to make the most of that, but recognise that not everybody can have access to online tools. So for certain consultations we are still doing letters, etc. But this is just one of the things that we've done over the summer to try and get and further our kind of public input. What we've also been doing is thinking about trying to understand what people are doing and the perceptions of travel during COVID. So we have been running an online survey where we've had a number of results, but we also wanted to have a more representative survey of people across West Yorkshire. So we've been running 3 waves of a transport telephone survey so that we can have representative views to understand people's kind of what they're doing, but also, as I say, what their perceptions are of what they might do in the future. And so there's a very long report that we have on our internet, on our web pages, with the results of these surveys. And I just thought I would give you a bit of a snapshot of 2 of them, and it's probably no surprise, but I think it's really helpful to have the evidence and the data to back up what we're hearing and what we're probably doing ourselves and what we know our friends and family are doing. So two things to kind of mention from this slide, and it helps to set the context of some of our future work. So as you can see, the modal choice for trips over the coming weeks, and these, I should say that the wave 1, wave 2 and wave 3 were at points over the summer, and we were thinking about doing a wave 4, but things are so up in the air at the moment, we're just deciding when to do that. So some of these are at points of time, like I say, I think it was July, August and September. So, but as you can see, there is a growing trend around back to using the car, and a decline in bus, a little bit increase in train, but I think that's probably dropped off again. Now we've gone into further, or will be going into further lockdown, and we saw an increase in people walking and cycling, but again some of that did flatten off. So I think what we wanted to understand is what people were doing and what they were likely to do in the future, because as I just mentioned around our kind of carbon targets, the people getting back in their cars or choosing car as their modal choice is not going to help us achieve the carbon targets that we've been talking about. The other thing, I think, as everybody has acknowledged, the working from home is not something we think will only be COVID related, but we do think we will see that trend continue. And certainly working from home was something that was already starting to happen. But we think from the results that we've had from our surveys that people are much more likely to continue this post-COVID. And also shopping online for food and other items is also likely to continue post-COVID as well. So it's really good that we have this level of data to help us plan for our policies and on what we're going to do next. So like I say, we are probably going to repeat some of these surveys. We're just deciding when to do it, given the uncertainty that we have at the moment. So all of this over the summer has led us to developing a transport recovery plan. There's lots of text on the slide. I don't necessarily think you'll be able to kind of necessarily read all of it as I'm talking. But what we wanted to show here is that those priorities that I mentioned right at the start around inclusive growth, around productivity, around carbon, we think still stand. And I think some of them become even more important as we go, hopefully, from where we are now into recovery and to resilience at some point in the future. And I think when we were writing this recovery plan over the summer, we really hoped that we would be in a kind of rescue phase now, and well, trying to probably move into recovery. But I think quite clearly the current lockdown means that we are, we're still very much in our kind of what we're calling here kind of rescue phase. So as I say, what we're trying to do through the recovery plan is still really focus on those wider objectives, and the priorities that you can see at the bottom in terms of public transport, ticketing information, walking, cycling and mitigating road travel are priorities kind of before COVID, but some of what COVID has now made happen, as I was just showing in terms of the return to the car, has potentially made harder. Other things may be easier. Certainly people did get on their bikes and did walk more during the first lockdown. It'll be really interesting to see the data during the next one, and with the kind of darker nights and colder weather, whether that trend will continue. So our transport recovery plan was something that we published over the summer, and I just thought I would pick out a couple of things from that that you might be kind of interested in. And I'll come back to this slide actually, because one of the things I wanted to mention was around buses. Because as many of you may know, in terms of the rail network, government effectively kind of cancelled the franchises and are funding the rail companies directly at the moment to run the rail services that we see. For buses, it's obviously different. So outside of London, buses are deregulated. So we work very closely with the bus operators. And before COVID, we had established a really good working relationship through our Bus Alliance. So this is a voluntary partnership that we have entered into with the operators around a whole set of things that we wanted to improve for the customer around ticketing, driver training, and this partnership did help us, stood us in good stead actually when the COVID situation hit, because it meant that we had that working relationship to quite quickly agree with the bus operators the network that we thought was needed, and the arrangements that we could put in place for customers and those still needing and wanting to travel as needed through the current lockdown, and that is now obviously continuing. So the bus network at the moment, a lot of it is being funded directly from government grant, but as I say, we're working with the bus operators as far as the current legislation allows us to understand how we can maximise that money for the passenger. And a couple of things that we are doing in parallel, I just wanted to highlight. We have what's called network navigation. So this kind of spaghetti map you can see here is Leeds and the bus network. And through funding that we have from government, we're trying to make it more legible for people by creating a kind of colour-coded network of services and looking at what that means for the bus stops, as you can see. So if you want to go to, from the city centre to hospitals, then you can kind of, it's more legible, hopefully, by being able to kind of jump on a kind of a blue bus, for example. So this is something that we consulted on, I think over the summer, on which month it was, we kind of gauged public opinion about this, and we are updating it based on that and looking to roll it out in Leeds first, and then we have secured further money to be able to roll it out across West Yorkshire. So hopefully that will help, particularly people who may be less familiar with using the bus. The other thing that we are also really focused on is around ticketing, because again, quite clearly, people might want to travel in different ways, in different patterns at different times, and maybe less frequently than they have. We're still working on that. Again, we have the ability through certain ability through the powers that we have to work with bus operators, but clearly we can only go so far in fare setting. Again, might be something we can come back to. But one of the things I wanted to highlight here is that we are looking at how we can make it easier for people to buy their tickets and use their tickets. And this is a new M-Card app that we have that we have launched on bus and hoping to bring it to rail too. So it'd be interesting to see if you've seen this. It's very new. This is only I think we've only just launched this, so good to know if you are an M-Card user and whether you've seen this or not. So just skip back a slide or two. What I also wanted to cover was some of our investment programs, because whilst COVID has impacted on many things, we have continued to try and fund many of the programs that we have money for, and construction has managed to continue with a few issues around supply chain in some cases, but a lot of things have carried on. So quite a number of investments that we have are either time limited or driven by criteria from government. But a couple of things here that I thought I would highlight. So the West Yorkshire Plus Transport Fund, awarded a few years ago now, was part of our early deals with government, and it's across West Yorkshire. and a number of schemes that are being implemented from there are highway schemes, but there's also rail park and ride and kind of bus priority. So West Yorkshire Transport Fund, quite a few of those schemes are either now on the ground or certainly close to being so. The next thing I thought I would highlight is the Leeds Public Transport Investment Programme. So this was awarded to Leeds and the Combined Authority back in 2017, and it was 174 million to invest in public transport, just within Leeds actually. And this was a mixture of corridor improvements and a lot of the work, if you have been into Leeds city centre, a lot of the work that's going on there at the moment along the Headrow, Corn Exchange, etc., is funded from this programme. And the money is again quite a short time frame within which to spend it. So the majority of it's supposed to be spent by March next year. As long as it's in contract, we have a few months thereafter. So that's been an important programme for essentially a lot of it is around hopefully trying to make the bus environment, bus priority, bus waiting, etc., better for passengers. And we, like I say, a lot of that is on the ground at the moment. The Transforming Cities Fund, as Councillor Groves mentioned earlier, was awarded to us in March, and that's 317 million. Again, very short amount of time to spend it in, by March 23. And Transforming Cities Fund is across West Yorkshire, so it's a region-wide fund, and again a real focus on thinking about bus priority, cycling and walking measures, and also about some of our important kind of gateways. So stations and bus stations are also in the list for investment, and we're still kind of in the stages of developing the business cases for Transforming Cities Fund, but some of that will be coming into construction quite quickly, given the amount of time through which we have to spend the money. So it's really great to see that investment into the region. Ideally, we'd like to see from government less of the bidding and more of a committed amount of money over a number of years, so that we can plan better. But for now, we will keep taking the opportunities as they come. And as already mentioned, we have the emergency active travel funding. That was money, we got about 2 million over the summer, and we have a bid in at the moment for around 10 for further investment in cycling and walking. And just to kind of highlight there at the bottom in terms of devolution, like I say, we are really hoping that devolution will bring with it a greater certainty around funding and the ability to have more of a single pot, so that we're less constrained by lots of kind of government criteria and can focus more on the types of things that we want to do in West Yorkshire. So quite a lot going on across the region in terms of investment. So moving then on to the kind of future, and like I say, often we've bid to government for things that they have, the competitions that they've put out, and what we would really like to do is be proactive in having a pipeline of the types of things that we want to invest here, and then convince government to kind of give us the money to do them. So we have been developing our connectivity strategy, as Councillor Groves mentioned, which really goes back to the evidence around all the different corridors in West Yorkshire where employment growth is, housing, and thinking right back to the start around the places to connect and how we should connect them, and the different modes that need to be connected. And I think what's quite interesting in doing this at this moment in time is that as we are all currently kind of sat at home or sat somewhere, we're not sat in offices, and we're not meeting, there is I think an ongoing challenge about how we can forecast and predict what might happen around passenger growth, around what people might want to do in the future. And I'm sure we'll have lots of questions when we publish this about kind of how we can think about this type of connectivity when we don't know what people's travel habits will be. And it is really tricky. I think our approach is, as I said right kind of from the start, that people will want to travel and they will want to travel again, and we want them to travel sustainably. So how can we put in place the right measures to try and convince people to use public transport or walk and cycle instead of getting into their car? And so that's the case I think we will continue to make for why we think developing a connectivity strategy and the pipeline that goes with it is important. As part of that connectivity strategy, we have started to look at what the different modes and what they can deliver for the region. So the majority of people who use public transport at the moment do so via bus, and maintaining the bus network is going to be really crucial post-COVID. And as I mentioned, at the moment, the government is giving money directly to bus operators, but we're really hopeful that we've been making a case to try and have the money directed through us so we can play a part in sustaining the bus network for passengers, because that's going to be crucial going forward. And equally on the rail network, I'll come on to shortly what we're doing around rail. Having looked at the demand, again, kind of pre-COVID, but having looked at demand and having looked at our ambitions for carbon, we do think that there is a case for mass transit to be part of that mix. And one of the things that we have therefore been doing is a worldwide, it says here, worldwide market testing exercise. So we have called for evidence from lots of different companies to really understand the new mix of technologies for what mass transit could be, and both in this country and abroad. And we've worked with both the University of Huddersfield and the University of Leeds to do this market testing exercise. And we had, I think, over 100 organisations reply to us about what the future of mass transit could look like. So really interesting. I think we published the report earlier this year, or it was last year, crikey, time does fly, earlier last year, and that got into the type of energy, what it could look like for the passenger, what it could look like for the streets that the type of mass transit might be kind of running on. So it was really good to be able to understand where the technology of the future could be around mass transit, and we are continuing to develop the case for this, and it will be part of the thinking around the connectivity strategy. We've also, as well as thinking about the kind of infrastructure, we have been developing a mobility strategy, so future mobility strategy. This is something that we have been working with organisations which are quite involved in this type of new technology, and we wanted to think about what our approach should be for future mobility. So there's lots of companies now out there, kind of e-scooters is probably one of the newer types of mobility that have come forward. And our future mobility strategy, we wanted to be clear about the kind of principles for what this might mean for us. And again, really focused on things like how it could help public transport, and also make sure that it's as inclusive as possible, so that if we're thinking about the kind of new mobility of the future, we don't create yet further divides between people. So as set out here, a number of core themes that we've been looking at. So digital demand responsive transport, really interesting examples in other parts of the country, where you have, as shown here, a kind of smaller bus which you can use an app to be able to kind of call on demand, and we're currently looking at a possible opportunity in West Yorkshire for that at the moment. Shared mobility, so thinking through shared bike hire, and again how we can make that accessible. Mobility as a service is one of those phrases which is kind of hard to it doesn't really tell you what it is by the title, but mobility as a service is how we can find a way of using apps to provide people with information and ticketing in one place, and also again make it as accessible as possible. So that's something we are thinking about at the moment, and working through whether we can do some of it through some of the technology that we currently have. First and last mile of freight, again, really important, particularly in terms of our carbon agenda, and there's some good examples have cropped up. I know there's an example in Calderdale at the moment, a kind of e-cargo bike that started during lockdown. And lastly on this page, the connected on autonomous vehicles is quite an interesting area where so far we are really interested in the public transport application potentially of connected autonomous vehicles, because whilst they might improve things like congestion, actually if we just transfer everybody from their kind of current car into an autonomous car, you could still be sat in a traffic jam if we don't kind of get other things right. So connected autonomous vehicles, I think people thought a few years ago these would be on our streets much sooner. There are trials in other parts of the country which we are kind of watching with interest, but at the moment doing more modelling of their modelling in terms of computer modelling their implications rather than anything on the street at the moment. So some interesting things there in terms of future mobility, and we had put a bid to government around what we could do with some of these across some of these themes. And we got really close but didn't quite make it into the top 3 or 4 in the country, but like I say, we are trying to see whether we can take some of this forward anyway through some of the funding that we have. So moving then onto rail, and there's quite a lot happening or has happened over the past few years around the franchising of rail services, with Northern, as many of you probably know, kind of been handed back to government, and what we've basically seen therefore is that many of the timetable changes that many of us were hoping for again kind of now have been impacted also by COVID, but we as a combined authority continue to work with government to make the case for many of the services that we think the region needs. As well as that, we have a number of major projects which government or Transport for the North are leading on. So the TRU, sorry for the acronym, Transpennine Route Upgrade, is one of the early projects, or should be an early project, although it's not proven to be so early, is a upgrade of the Transpennine route between Manchester and York, and is looking really around renewals because it's a piece of track which hasn't been invested in for quite a long time, and also improving journey times and providing extra capacity. So Transpennine Route Upgrade is something that we are working to try and secure government commitment to it in its entirety. We think it's really important for the reasons I've just said, but also electrifying the line and enabling it to be used for freight as well. A couple of things that we are looking to government to do. Calder Valley line also is something that we are hoping to be electrified, but isn't currently on the government's list, so one that we can keep pursuing. In terms of major projects that are also being developed, HS2 is well, as again, depending on how much you kind of follow this, is currently being built to Birmingham. They have the powers then to continue it to Crewe, from London, and then at Crewe it breaks up into Manchester and then to Leeds. So there's kind of the east and west legs, and we continue to make the case for the eastern leg of HS2 coming up through the Midlands, Sheffield, and to Leeds, with a station in Leeds city centre. And part of this is definitely around capacity and the need for extra rail lines in the country. Again, kind of COVID. Nobody's really travelling at the moment, but we think it will return. And HS2 as well is really important for those journeys, not just to London, but to places, like I say, to Sheffield and to Birmingham. It only takes 2 hours to get from Leeds to Birmingham. HS2 will halve that and make travelling kind of more of something that people will be more willing to do. At the same time, Northern Powerhouse Rail, this is the new rail line, hopefully between branches right across the north, from Liverpool through to Hull, through to the northeast. Particularly for our region, what we are looking at is around a new line from Manchester via Bradford to Leeds. This is very much in the development stages of the work at the moment. So Transport for the North, a body which is made up of all the northern authorities, is leading this work and is producing a business case at the moment. So it's very much about extra capacity for the north and improving those journey times, so that if you live in one part of the north but want a job in another, at the moment that can be quite restricted. But if you can reduce the journey time from Leeds to Manchester to around half an hour, then that might become more doable for you. So Northern Powerhouse Rail, like I say, very much in its early stages of development work, but something again that we are pursuing with government. And very much at the same time, we definitely need the capacity around Leeds station in particular. There's pinch points both east and west of the station. And the East Coast Main Line, in terms of its reliability, is definitely something that could be improved. So there's a whole host of major rail projects that we think are still needed for the north. Government is currently writing what they're calling an integrated rail plan by the end of the year, which they say will set out their priorities for the North and the Midlands, and maybe also give an idea of around timing of some of these things. So we're working really hard to try and convince them of the things that we think are needed for the region. And then just kind of lastly on HS2, and just a few more examples of the types of the numbers of people that the eastern leg could serve. So that's, like I say, the Leeds to Sheffield down to the East Midlands, and the number of people that could serve. So we are, like I say, we're really keen to keep the momentum going with High Speed 2, alongside the investment, as I say, that we need both for the regional and the local network as well. So I've talked quite a lot there, probably more than I thought I was going to, but you asked me to talk about 45 minutes. I think I have. So I'm more than happy to take questions on any of that, because I appreciate there's a lot there, and we can come back to me then. Thank you.
I'll unmute myself.
Priscilla.
I think you're on mute, Priscilla.
It says mute now. Hello?
Hello there.
Okay,
Good.
Thank you very much, Liz and Kim. That's very interesting indeed, and I'm sure well, there already are quite a lot of questions. So we'll stop now, and we'll start again, say at 25 minutes to 9. Is that all right for everybody? To have a drink and so on, and I'll get the questions in, try and get the questions into some sort of order. All right then. Thank you very much. Decide who's going to answer the questions. Is everybody unmuted? I'll start with the first question. which was from, I'm afraid I think this was from Gilda. How will, there's been I think the inquiry about the airport is going forward now, isn't it? So how will, if the airport is allowed to expand, how will that impact on the Leeds strategy for reducing carbon?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the zero carbon roadmap that we've got at WICA, which were done by some consultants for us, the most important piece of work we've got to do is around the private car and HGV. And as they reduce, the airport becomes a bigger problem. However, I think there needs to be a national aviation strategy. And I think there needs to be some really strong policies to do with aviation, so that everybody is taking collective responsibility, and was really pleased to see the decarbonisation plan by Network Rail a couple of weeks ago. Aviation as an industry know that they have to play their part in zero carbon.
Right. Now, who did ask? Was that it was Mike, wasn't it? What did you want to say something, Mike?
Well, if just briefly, if I may, Leeds City Council, though of course it impacts WICA as well, their legal advice has been that they, as we understand it, we haven't seen it, their legal advice is they can ignore the carbon emissions from the airport. GALBA, which is the group against the expansion, its legal advice is that they should indeed take it into account. Now, however that's resolved, there's no doubt that it's going to drive a coach and horses, if I may use a transport metaphor, through the strategy that certainly Leeds has for reducing carbon emissions. Waiting for a national strategy doesn't seem to me to be on the cards, given that the decision is going to be made within the next month or two by the planning committee.
So obviously I can't comment ahead of any planning committee because I am a councillor. So I can't legally comment on that. All I can give you is my opinion that as a country, we do need a national policy around aviation. The industry do need to look at different technologies. And actually, I think there's going to be some difficult political decisions to be made right across the country if we look at what other countries have done. And if we are thinking about carbon credits and households and how you're going to use those, they're the type of policy things that need to be brought to the forefront and discussed nationally.
Okay, thanks very much then. We'll go on to the next question, which is from John Farley, who says that the ambition to achieve a 300% increase in cycling is huge. Is it going to be achievable?
Okay, I'll start and then do you want to come in, Liz? Yeah. So cycling and walking, my view on cycling and walking when I came down to WICA was that it is the Cinderella of transport and it should not be. We've got a lot to do to increase those targets. I'm really pleased with the new standards, the design standards that the government are issuing. My disappointment as a country and obviously across West Yorkshire is that there's been no funding to maintain cycleways that have already been implemented, and that funding has to be devolved down to local governments. The standard that we want has to make to attract the numbers. People have to feel safe. And women, especially, that's a group that can target to increase the numbers, have made it loud and clear that there needs to be real segregation and allocation of road space. For me, it's about allocation of road space for cycling, walking, or mobility scooters. And the figures, where the figures are really improving are on our greenways. So if anybody who is a cyclist has been to Castleford Greenway that links to the Trans-Pennine route, you will know that it is absolutely a state-of-the-art cycle route. it's attracted many people from different communities for cycling and walking. And I did notice that somebody in the chat said about that you need seats along those routes and toilets. And we do need to get to that type of standard. I went to Waltham Forest to see exactly what they'd done around cycling and walking. And they had made some absolutely brave political decisions to close off streets to cars, to close off streets streets where schools were, and implement some high standard. And that's where we're moving towards. So we have to keep working towards these targets.
But is it achievable? Is it going to be achievable, do you think? It's very huge. What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, Liz, do you want to come in on that?
What I was going to say is that was the target that we had a few years ago, and now with the carbon pathway work that we've been doing, that might need to even increase further in terms of the number. We need those, particularly, cycling can cover a whole manner of different journeys, but some of the ones we're really focusing on is those short journeys that people kind of hop in the car for. And so, is it achievable? It's really tough. It's going to be tough, not only the 300%, but the more that we're likely going to have to need to meet our carbon target. But if we don't set ambitious targets, then I think what I'm saying is we should set ambitious targets, even if we don't quite know 100% if we're going to make it, because I think we need to keep the pressure on ourselves and the funders for the funding. And I think a lot of it will be dependent, as Councillor Groves is saying, around that infrastructure. And a lot of that is then dependent on what further funding might come from government. They had announced back in March a pot of money around kind of 2 billion for cycling and walking for the country. We've had only a small part of that up to now. I think we've only had about 2 million of it, which is tiny. So I think only through proper and sustained investment will we create the infrastructure that we need, and we're reliant quite a lot on government for that.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Priscilla, I asked a question? Could I just make a quick comment?
Yes. Who is it? Sorry, who is it?
John Farley.
All right, yeah.
I'm Kim. I'm glad to hear you say about road allocation of space, because that has been the thing that hasn't been taken. That decision hasn't been taken. Leeds has got an appalling record historically. I've been campaigning around cycling infrastructure since 1995. So I see we're moving in the right direction, and all those points are recognised. But an example of what I'm saying is not so much can it be achieved, it easily could be, but it's political will. And I still feel there's not enough of that, I'll be honest with you. And with the COVID emergency money, some schemes have been developed, which I have been to some of the meetings about. The problem is, by the time these plans are even put together, everybody was back in their cars. There's more car traffic around now. So all these people who went out on their bikes, and I saw a lot of them, and they're wobbling along, and it's great to see them. But now there's no infrastructure for them, and by the time it comes into place, I just feel we might have lost the moment. So you need to really be thinking about simple things like actually just take a lane where there's 3 lanes for cars, take one and make it for cycling and walking. There you go, job done. And it doesn't have to cost a fortune. I love segregated infrastructure stuff, but I know it's expensive, and without government funding, as you say, that's an issue. So that will be my message to you. You've got to be bold, and you're going to have to take on, people are going to have to recognize they just can't drive everywhere, especially into city centres. It just isn't a great mix. That is really my plea. Please do something along those lines.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. I think we'll move on to the next question, which is from Martin and Liz. And this is about the providing, if you're going to encourage people to walk, and particularly walking, a lot of people will need seats to sit on and toilets and things like that. And is this being considered as part of the plan?
Yes. Shall I? So
no, go ahead.
So we've been trying to develop something called Streets for People, which is kind of almost a bit of a checklist of the types of things, and feels like really basic things, but things that we think could make a difference, i.e. like you say, kind of having benches. Because what's interesting is that in some things which you think would be really beneficial, sometimes we've had opposition. So even benches, I think sometimes previously for some schemes, the police have said, oh well, they can become places where then people can congregate. So we're trying to strike the right balance. So like I say, we've created this kind of checklist of things that we think we'd like to see in schemes, and we're funding in each district an example. So nothing on the ground yet, but we hope we will get some good practice from that to share with you across all the districts. Because I should be really kind of clear, I suppose, that everything we do is with our district partners, because they are the highway authority for schemes, but we are working with them closely, and it's good to see that those are the types of things that you want, because we can continue to make the case for them.
Okay, thank you. Now the next question is from
Can I
Jamie.
just
Sorry.
pop in the little thought that during the time of COVID, when many restaurants and pubs are closed, many people who've been using their toilets haven't got them. So at the very time we want people to walk, it is difficult. It's a purely mechanical issue. Please help.
Okay, hope the message has been received then. The next question is from Janie, and this is for I think for Councillor Groves. Is the City Council considering bringing the buses back into public ownership?
At this moment in time, legislation prevents us from actually doing that, so we can't bring it back. We just haven't the powers out there to do so, but we are obviously hoping to move to an enhanced partnership. We are doing work in the background towards franchising. I've been working with my colleagues in Liverpool and Manchester who are already far advanced down the franchising route. It's not easy. It takes about 3 years if we were to move to franchising. I'm not convinced in terms of the model that we've got across the country of double-decker buses. We've lost lots of mileage. The fare structures are not right. There's so much to do around both.
Janie, do you want to?
All that work's taking place. But you have to go to a partnership before you can apply for franchising.
Okay.
You have to prove to the government that that model doesn't work.
Right. If we become, you'll go, obviously the mayoralty, if we have a mayor, is that going to make it easier?
Yeah, we could apply for franchising powers, and we would still have to get all the legal work done before we actually, because we will get a challenge from the operators, as we did with NGT from First Bus. So we're doing all that work at this moment in time. I think my focus is on the COVID recovery and how much we can work with the operators, because certainly in these challenging circumstances, the bus figures are still holding up. They're not what they were, but they are about 56% in terms of usage. We won't have a tram system for a while. We're applying for the 4.2 billion for the tram system, and all the work's been done on those routes. So our bus is really the main mover of people. So I'm exploring all those partnership options, because I've been told that people just want a reliable, affordable and a simple bus system. But it cannot be just down the arterial routes. It needs to have different mix of vehicles, smaller buses that can get around those communities as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks.
Right, thank you. Now, I think the next question is from Reinhardt, isn't it? About the possibility of using a car pollution tax in Leeds to subsidise public transport. Would you like to explain that more, Reinhardt? I'm not quite. Oh, has he gone?
No, he's there.
No, I'm here. But I thought the question was clear. I mean, like London has got a tax, or I don't know whether you call it tax or a fee. So I think similar fees should be introduced in all major cities, especially as I feel as cyclist that the air in Leeds is very polluted. And so I think the polluters should pay, and that would hopefully get more people onto public transport if the money is used to make public transport cheaper.
Yeah, it's a congestion charge, isn't it? Like in London.
Yeah, you can call it congestion charge. I call it pollution charge because I'm very, very annoyed that car drivers call it freedom when they blow their air into my lungs and cause my heart and disease and cancer. So I think they should at least pay for it.
Right. Well, Liz Hunter, would you like to answer that? Well, what's the position of the not Leeds, the what is it? The combined authority on a tax. What do you call it? The pollution tax.
I call it congestion charge, as I said. Pollution
Yeah,
charge is much better because that hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think some of you may also know it as a kind of clean air zone, where you're basically limiting the types of vehicles that could enter, or asking them to pay a significant sum of money. So yeah, it's called different things potentially for different purposes. So Leeds was looking at a clean air zone. So from a combined authority perspective, it's the powers at the moment, or at least the authority kind of sits with each of the districts. So we at the moment don't have any plans to introduce any form of tax or congestion charge or zone. What's interesting, a few years ago we did a presentation on the transport strategy that I mentioned earlier, and we asked around, this type of intervention, and would the public support it? And I can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but there definitely wasn't a majority of people in support of such a thing, but there was probably more than we thought that there might be. But like I say, at the moment we don't have any plans, but the districts are thinking about how they improve their air quality. But who knows what a mayor might want to do, and what the districts might want to do to support them. As you say, in terms of London, the Mayor of London came in on the back of a manifesto around a congestion charge, but we don't currently have any plans.
Right, thank you. Now there've been several questions around this, and someone, I don't know who this is from, saying they feel there hasn't been enough community involvement in consultations in West Yorks. I don't know who sent this question in. How do you feel there's been sufficient community involvement? I mean, how have you managed to involve communities?
So we've done it through various channels and continue to do so. When we were consulting on transforming cities, it was done in every district. It was done in York, it was done in Kirklees, it was done in Wakefield. When we've been consulting on young people's fairs, we have actually, because it's not just about digital, we have a digital divide across West Yorkshire. We've been at bus stations, we've been into school colleges, we've gone through council websites, we've engaged with youth parliament, we've engaged with youth groups from West Yorkshire and South Yorkshire, and we've used all channels of communication to make sure that no one was excluded from consultation. Consultation going forward has been challenging in COVID, because actually we can't get out into those bus stations to do that consultation anymore. The devolution deal was done through a channel called Your Voice, which is our West Yorkshire channel of communication for consultation. So I do feel that we do try and when it's possible to consult far and wide, and as chair I want to hear from lots of sections of the community right across West Yorkshire. It's really important to do so.
I wonder how many people who are on the screen now have actually been able to contribute. Does anybody?
That was
Yeah.
my question. May I come? This is Ruth here, Ruth Galetli. Can I come in? That was my question.
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks. I'm not showing a video because I've got a bad connection, so I don't want to lose the connection completely. Thanks very much for the answer. There's a real difference between consulting people on plans that are already formed, Councillor Groves, I think, and actually getting out and getting people participating in the idea, the design, the development of a scheme. And I appreciate at the moment it's very difficult. And in Leeds, in fact, we do have quite a good system because several of us are quite closely involved with Councillor Mulheron and the Highways Department. But I know from the work I do with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, I sit on a consultative committee there, there's been very little meaningful engagement with communities, such that schemes land on communities without communities having a chance to really get engaged and work through what it means for them, what the problem is, what possible solutions there are to the problems they have. And we know from other parts of the country, particularly from Ealing, for example, that this has created a real backlash in the community, even among people who are predisposed towards cycling and walking. So my plea is that we completely reconsider how we do engagement with the communities, and we really involve people from the very beginning in what the problem is, what the issues are we're trying to solve, what the benefits of such schemes would be, particularly around the health benefits, community engagement benefits, and then get the community working together with the experts, with the highway planners and people, and really get something in place which will be a sustainable solution going forward. It requires a complete rethink, I think, about how these sorts of schemes are done. Thank you.
So it's interesting that you mentioned Leeds there, and obviously I work closely with Councillor Mulheron. So all the Transforming Cities were done through the districts, through portfolio holders like Councillor Mulheron and the districts. They're their schemes. They're actually, we are the sponsor, and the local councils are their schemes. So all West Yorkshire councils were involved in that. I take on point what you're saying about consultation and making sure that the people shape the agenda. And I think I've been really clear on the zero carbon workshop, decarbonising transport, that it didn't just become an academic debate, because actually I represent a community that has some of the highest health inequalities in West Yorkshire. So that debate, it was crucial that they are part of that journey, and I think that's what we're endeavouring to do at West Yorkshire. Certainly the West Yorkshire Rail Vision, as the work has been engaging with every elected member that sits on the Transport Committee, and they are the community's voice, and then it will be taken out for further consultation. It's going to the Transport Committee on the next agenda, as is all the bus work. And we've also engaged with trade unions, the TUC. I was on a call with 90 different people only 2 weeks ago, listening to all their views and their problems, the barriers that they face on a daily basis around the bus. So we're doing everything that we can. It is challenging at this moment in time, I would say.
Okay, well, thank you very much. The next question is from Roger Hawkins. It is about trams. Would you like to ask the question, Roger? Perhaps to Liz Hunter, she could reply.
It's this is me. It's the comment really which will lead, I think, to questions. I think there's a lack of vision in what's been described tonight. I don't understand why the whole of West Yorkshire wouldn't be looking at a new system based around the tram. It solves a lot of problems. It doesn't just move people, it does it pollution free. And obviously it makes a heck of a mess when you build one, as they discovered in Bordeaux for 6 years when they did one there. But I think a tramway linking, and I don't just mean in Leeds, I'm talking West Yorkshire, and I know its parts are very hilly. So clearly that's a factor one would have to take into account. But I think future electrically powered, as they are, tramway would be part of my vision for the future of West Yorkshire. And it does solve a lot of other problems. If you've got it, if you do it properly, a lot of people just would not need a car. Students and the like who don't usually have them, as far as I know, can get around without clogging up the system and so on.
So Liz Hunter, would you like to answer that and perhaps explain why aren't we having an overall tram system? Is it too expensive?
So I think this is one of terminology maybe. So I mentioned in my presentation around we're looking at mass transit.
You did mention that. I've written it down.
We are so in what I mentioned about this technology call for evidence to understand what the best technologies are out there, and that looked at everything from what's called kind of bus rapid transit. So some of the systems that you've got now in Glasgow and other places, through to tram, light rail, tram, train. Because what we were trying to understand is where the future of that type of technology is going, and exactly what you're saying in terms of batteries, electric powered. Do you need wires? Do you not need wires anymore? Can you, so all of that is exactly what we are looking at. But rather than, I suppose, say tram, because I think there's a wide range of technologies out there. We're currently calling it mass transit, but maybe that's something we need to be better at.
We called it mass transit 40 years ago when I was a town planner, but it doesn't have to be based by one system. What I would suggest is the tramway is the backbone of the transport system, linked obviously to the railways, and then fill in the gaps between the arterial routes with buses or something similar. I also put in that statement that I think spending any more money on improving roads is a complete waste of time, and I don't think you should do it. That's probably quite contentious, but we've got enough roads, and when we can't all afford electric cars, and when the country is full of the equivalent of parking meters in every street so that people can charge electric cars, we'll know we've made a mistake. But I won't be here then. I'm old enough to know I won't be here when that's happened. I don't think there's enough vision in what's being described at the moment. HS2 is a complete red herring. I know you've probably got to plan around it, but I'm not convinced it's going to get to Leeds for at least 20 or 30 years. You need to think about the interim period. Anyway, there is also the theory it'll suck money and development down to the southeast, which is what the M1 did.
So we are preparing a business case to bid into the 4.2 billion that government have announced for mass transit tram system. We have been working for a number of years on this. We've been to Birmingham, I've been to Manchester, Sheffield, I've even driven a tram. So that is definitely in the plan.
Did you learn a lot from doing that?
I did, yes. It was good. And I think really going and understanding the financial model that they've developed, and Nottingham, who use a transport levy to get to really reinvest into the tram system. We are working on different route options. It has to be a West Yorkshire tram system. It can't be anything else. Whilst we cannot fail again, is what I would say. So that's why we've had to take our time. I obviously, as a Leeds councillor and a Middleton councillor, NGT was coming through my ward. We learned an awful lot from that, and we're not going to fail on this one, because it's the one question that I get asked everywhere I go is about a tram system. But I think there's a stage before that, and I think when we're talking about buses, we need reallocation of road space for bus rapid transit systems as well. So there is a big
castaway buses, we used to call them.
Absolutely. It seems crazy that we're talking about this now. I'm sat looking at Middleton Woods where the old tram tracks were, and a tram used to run up there all those years ago. So we're behind. We are behind on transport. You know, when you look at everything that's happening in Europe and in Canada and beyond, and their transit systems, we're sadly lacking. So we agree with everything that you're saying, Roger.
Thank you very much.
All you got to do then is go away and do it.
We're trying.
Be very
We're
happy.
trying.
Absolutely. There's another question here. I'm sorry, I don't know who this is from, but pointing out that 23% of households in West Yorkshire do not possess a car. How will your policy help, Liz?
Thanks. I think that was that from Ruth as well. So thanks, and thanks, Ruth. I think so. I think a lot of what we're trying to do is about providing the alternative to the car. From hopefully many of the things that you've heard from us tonight is around, from our perspective, that the different modes and how they can help. So as a kind of key aim really is about trying to get that modal shift when people do start travelling again, that we can provide the alternative for them to the car. And so those people who don't currently have a car should help those people as well. And we are trying to focus on our work around the connectivity strategy around those neighbourhoods. We are looking at those neighbourhoods that are have the indices of deprivation that are higher than other parts of the region, other parts of the country.
Okay.
So can I just ask, it's Ruth here again. Thank you, Liz. Can I just ask, will this be an explicit aim? Because I'm concerned, if we're talking here about vision and about political leadership, it would be really nice to see a really clear political aim that says we will be a region where you don't need to own a car. And that's not saying you can't own a car, you can't use a car, but it will enfranchise the almost quarter of the population who do not have access to the car and who are currently disadvantaged in their access to a whole range of facilities that those of us who have a car take for granted. It's the vision bit that's terribly important at this point. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. And it's certainly something as we're developing our strategy that we are testing across all of our districts. And I think at the moment there is quite a difference between some of our districts, in even within West Yorkshire, of the public transport provision that they have. And I think given some of our communities, it depends over what time period we're thinking as well in terms of this as an aim, because we think there will, at least in the short term, the car will still be used, but it's how we can make that transition over time, and thinking about some of our communities who aren't as well connected, certainly.
Okay, thank you very much. There have been several people who made comments or questions about HS2, so I'll combine them to say, sorry, somebody's ringing. I'll just take it outside. Sorry about that. Please stop now. I'll take it outside. It's about HS2, and people are asking why not upgrade existing lines and put more investment into improving existing lines, particularly for commuter routes, rather than spending all this money on HS2. I mean, I got the impression from what you said that you were trying to do both, but would it not be better to prioritise one or the other?
I think we certainly are trying to do it all, because we've had such a lack of investment in our rail infrastructure in the north, and particularly in Yorkshire and Humber. Actually, if you look at some of the numbers around public investment in transport, it's not there in comparison to some other parts of the country. So we would like it all, and I think we need to be ambitious to be so. I think what, particularly around High Speed 2 and also Northern Powerhouse Rail, which are the two schemes which are looking to actually add new capacity, so new lines. It is about that capacity that we don't think is there currently on our existing local network. So when people ask us for more services, they want greater frequency from the stations that they use. It's really tricky at the moment to squeeze that into our existing network, because many of the tracks at peak times are full. So what we're really arguing for is that extra capacity, so that we can make best use of our local network as well by putting some of those intercity services onto new lines. And I think that's particularly, if you think about at the moment, as I say, it's not just about High Speed 2, it is about Northern Powerhouse Rail as well. And even when we've completed the upgrade that we're looking for the Transpennine route between Manchester and Leeds, you're still not going to fit too many more trains down that route at peak times. So that's why a new line is needed. So it's the interaction between adding that capacity and what that can then mean for our local services. That said, our local services also need strengthening. We need platform extensions. We need greater reliability, certainly in terms of our network. And if you think, as I think I mentioned in the slides, some of the capacity that we see really squeezed at the moment is around Leeds station. So sometimes people ask us why we focus just on Leeds, and that's because that's currently constraining the ability for us to run services throughout the region, because we just can't get them through and in and around Leeds. So the new infrastructure is there, I think, also to help our local infrastructure, providing that additional capacity.
To continue about, I mean, HS2 is going to make such a mess in that it's going to involve so much pulling down so much existing infrastructure. And in fact, there are tunnels under the Pennines that aren't being used, aren't there? I mean, there's one, the parallel, as the one that goes under at Marsden. Why can't that be used?
So, between Manchester and Leeds, there are a number of different options that Transport for the North, who are leading on the project, are looking at, which, given the topography, as you say, of the Pennines, is likely to involve significant tunnelling. I can't imagine it not doing. So that is definitely still being looked at. It's quite hard sometimes to bring back into play kind of existing kind of old infrastructure, because sometimes it can cost just as much to make it safe as it can be to kind of build new. But that's what the engineers tell me anyway.
Okay, thank you. I've come. Well, I don't know if there are any more written questions. I can't actually see any, though I'm not very clever at my screen. I wonder, Janie, would you mind just glancing? Where is she?
I'm here. Yeah.
Yes. If anyone else is anxious to ask a question, could they perhaps raise their hand?
Yes, there was one that I think you didn't pick up on. I'm just looking to see where it was. Where was it? I'm just looking. Yeah, if people work more, this is a question from Dougal, if people work more from home, they may choose to live further from home, thereby increasing commuting distance and negating the gains of less frequent travel. Is this something that the planners envisage, and how are they going to deal with this?
Yeah, it's trying to predict what's going to happen in the future, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Gross.
No, it's something we have been discussing, I think, at the Economic Recovery Board, and you know, obviously sectors changing, and Leeds City Centre, for instance, obviously all the offices, people may never return to them, and that's a real concern. It's really difficult to forecast, but I know the industries are looking at what their new markets might look like as well.
Yeah,
it's difficult.
I think it's about it. For me, some of this is around what people might accept doing a longer journey, but for 3 days a week rather than 5. Does that mean that they have access, therefore, to a greater number of jobs than they might otherwise? Does it mean they have access to a job which is better suited for their skills, which then helps productivity? So I think that in itself could be quite interesting. Because as I said, when I moved north, I kind of chose where to live, and then I know some people do commute from Leeds to Manchester, but not that many, because of the distance. And I shouldn't really say this in front of Councillor Groves, but you know, if in the future there's a job in Manchester and it takes less time to commute, then I would be more, you know, I would be as interested. But at the moment, it feels quite a long way. So part of this is about getting people in the right jobs for the right skills, and it could be interesting if they're willing to do a bit more at home and a bit in the office. It might broaden their horizons also. Mm-hmm. But we need to enable them to do it sustainably.
Yeah, that's very true. I think I saw. I know, Roger, you've already asked a question, but Roger had a question. Yeah. Okay, Roger.
Well, I was going to make the point out of what's just been discussed. If they're going to work from home, they don't need to commute. Fundamentally, you can make assumptions about 3-day weeks and the rest of it. I used to go to work, the office, twice a week, because those were the days I taught. But the other days I went elsewhere, well, stayed at home basically and worked from 8 till 8 quite often. However, that sounds like a self-advert. But the point I was going to raise, and there's nothing that you can do about it as a combined transport authority at the moment, if the government does what it's saying it says it's going to do to the planning system, which is basically demolish it, it won't be easy for you to do what I would otherwise suggest. If they don't demolish the system, you need to somehow make sure that you can work closely enough with the 5 local authorities to try to ensure that public transport is built in to new housing developments. I'm saying because somebody mentioned about the 25% of people who are in a house where they don't have a car, that all new development is predicated on the use of a car and possibly 2. Because look at what house builders build, and I warn you, housing is a topic of mine. I used to work in it as a job. Builders don't build what is needed, they build what they can sell. And they won't volunteer to build in the public transport links. And I'm not sure what, apart from Section 106 agreements, whereby the developers have to agree to provide a certain proportion, in theory, of affordable housing, which isn't because of the laws about how you calculate an affordable house rent. There is no way that you're going to get public transport built in. And you need to lobby for that, I think, very, very hard.
So Roger, at the next Transport Committee, we have got a document that contains transit orientated planning around new developments, new employment zones that are emerging across West Yorkshire, to make sure that actually when those schemes are going to the planning, that all members are aware that actually we need to think of public transport first, the links to public transport first, rather than leave developments and Section 106 money as a gift to the developers, who may just decide, you know, that there's that route will be pump primed, and then when the money is spent, the operators won't take it on. We need to make it really clear that that's the type of planning condition that we want around new developments and employment zones. When we've done the strategy across West Yorkshire, we've made sure that there's a links to those employment zones and new housing development sites. In Dewsbury, we've got a 4,000 development housing site coming to fruition over the next couple of years. But one of the most disappointing things for me and how the system has failed is we had an employment site just outside Leeds at Sherburn in Elmet that had 1,000 vacancies and people just could not get to that site. They want high paid jobs. They were lower paid jobs, and people who didn't have any transport could just not take those jobs. We've rectified that, but we've had to negotiate with the bus operators, but they're providing a service now, which means all those vacancies can be filled. But none of that was thought through. None of that was thought through at a planning stage.
It's just that I have in mind. That sort of problem, I mean.
Yeah, well, I'll send you a copy of the document that's going to the Transport Committee. I think you'll
be interesting. Yes. Well, they're open to the public.
Yes,
presumably.
yes, you're all welcome. You're welcome to attend the Transport Committee. It is a public meeting, and I've got Claire Haig coming from Greener Journeys to the next meeting.
Sorry, I don't know the names. I lived away
she's
from
very
Britain
good
for a while, and all my old contacts are either retired and as old as I am, or dead. So I don't know names at all.
Yeah, Claire's from Greener Journeys, and she writes for Transport Times. She's excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, it's nearly, we're time for just one more question, I think, if anyone would like to, anyone else has got something to say.
Did I see Richard raise his hand there? Richard, or Eleanor, you attempted to write something earlier. Did you have a question? Sorry, you've got to unmute yourself.
No.
It was just from the point of view of someone who doesn't have a car or a bicycle. And in walking around my locality and sometimes into town, I just noticed a very bad state of pavements. They seem to be in the same unrepaired state for years, because I still see the same potholes and the same paving stones sticking up as I did some years ago. So if people are to be encouraged to walk for their health and to lower carbon emissions, just think, to my mind, it seems that some money needs to be put into a comprehensive repair programme for local pavements.
I certainly agree.
That also, it also affects people who are disabled or elderly. For example, my mother, I used to wheel her in her wheelchair, and it was almost impossible to actually wheel her around locally. You know, the pavements were just not set up for wheelchair access.
Yes, I completely agree. And for older people, generally.
Perhaps I can be rude enough to save our councillor friend saying it. When you've got a government that consistently reduces the amount of money local authorities can spend on highway maintenance, this is what you get.
Does the council has a duty, all public bodies have a duty to do an equality impact assessment on all projects that they fund. And it would be very interesting to compare the amount of money that is spent on highways. I mean, some of the new roundabouts that have been put in on the ring roads around here, and compare the amount of money that's spent on that in comparison to the money that is not spent on pedestrian crossings and improving the facilities for pedestrians. I think that's something that councils ought to start looking at now, because there's a lot of interest in exploring how transport inequalities are being increased rather than decreased at the moment because of the way the funding is being spent. The 25%, 23% of the population that don't have access to the car are constantly discriminated against in the way funding is spent on improving facilities for cars and not improving the facilities for people who need to walk and indeed cycle, but particularly for people who need to walk.
That's true, but unfortunately highways expenditure includes footpaths, so it's all in the same pot.
It does, and it's a reduced pot. I think in terms of how we tackle that, I think it is really challenging because we just don't have the budgets. So I could sit here and say that we could look at it, but we just don't have the budgets.
Well, it's especially irritating.
Sorry, Richard.
Oh, I was just going to say it's especially irritating because the improvements on the ring road, of course, it's a trunk road. Absolutely. So it's funded by central government rather than the local authority.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are looking at Wyker is putting a carbon lens on all future highway schemes, because actually if we're really serious about a zero carbon environment and a public transport system, then there is a need to challenge, as Ruth has just said, in terms of where could that funding be used if we were to cancel those schemes. So we are putting a zero carbon lens on all of the schemes that we've got down at Wyker.
Right, well, thank you very much. And on that rather slightly political note, I think we'll better call it a day. So thank you very much indeed, Councillor Groves and Liz as well, for coming to talk to us. I thought it was very interesting. So thank you very much indeed. I think we'll give them all a clap. Can we do that?
Thank you, everyone, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.